In the shadow of the ancient olive trees, where the sound of the night whispers mysteries that reason cannot grasp, something profound and invisible unfolded, far beyond religious narratives. Gethsemane was not just a dramatic backdrop in the final moments of Jesus. It was a turning point in the spiritual destiny of humanity, a force field where dimensions intertwined and where the soul of the world was touched. That silent and humble land hid a cosmic secret beneath its branches. There, in the deepest confrontation of a man with his eternal purpose, a door was revealed that connects the human to the divine, time to the eternal, the body to the infinite. Gethsemane is more than history. It's a symbol, a code, a mirror. Many have heard about Jesus' suffering in that garden, but few realize the vibrational depth of that place. He did not choose Gethsemane by chance. Situated at the foot of the Mount of Olives, the site was already revered as a special energetic field, one of the few spaces in Jerusalem where heaven and earth seem to touch. The ancient prophets walked there in search of vision. The presence of the olive trees, trees with deep and long-lived roots, indicated more than physical fertility. It symbolized ancestral wisdom, living memory, continuity between generations, and connection with the unseen. Each leaf that quivered that night held within it the frequency of what was about to happen. Gethsemane represented a threshold, a transition point between two states of consciousness. Not only was Jesus crossing the boundary between public life and sacrifice, but also humanity, unknowingly, was being led to a new level of perception. It was there that the ultimate choice would be made, not just by one man, but by a collective field. Gethsemane is the symbol of the moment where each of us faces our own crossroads. To flee or transcend, resist or surrender, remain in the old self or break through to the unknown. The night there was not just literal. It represented the plunge into shadow, into doubt, into the pain that precedes the birth of a new light. Little is spoken about the energetic preparation of that place. Ancient accounts mention that Jesus often retreated to Gethsemane to pray, not out of convenience, but because he recognized the special magnetic field of the place. It was as if he knew that there, the boundaries between worlds were more delicate. The repetition of his presence on that sacred ground further charged the place with his own energy. Prayer, a practice of extremely high vibrational potential when done with pure intention, made Gethsemane a living sanctuary, a vortex of direct communication with higher planes. On that decisive night, the field was already prepared, as if the entire earth held its breath, waiting for the crucial moment. It's impossible to ignore the parallelism between Gethsemane and the moments we all face when we're on the brink of major decisions. There exists in every human being a Gethsemane moment, a point where we are called to transcend our personal will for something greater. It may be an illness, a bereavement, a loss, or a deep crisis. During these times we feel alone, abandoned, and directionless. But it is precisely here where power lies hidden. It was in this state that Jesus, knowing what was to come, chose loving obedience. Not as blind submission, but as an expression of his connection with the whole. Gethsemane teaches us that pain can be the womb of awakening, that suffering, when understood, opens the channel to the divine. The olive tree, the central symbol of this space, not only produced the oil used in sacred anointments, it was itself seen as a symbol of resistance, wisdom, and spiritual alliance. Its deep roots allowed it to remain alive even under scorching sun or rocky terrain. The name Gethsemane comes from the Aramaic gat shmanim, which means oil press. In other words, symbolically, it is the place where the essence is extracted under pressure. The pain of Jesus, the sweat like blood, the agony of choice, all of these are representations of the extraction of the divine essence within a human vessel. In other words, Gethsemane is the point where the spirit, compressed by the flesh and fear, releases its purest light. The scriptures show that, on that night, Jesus asked his disciples to keep watch with him, but they all fell asleep. This, more than a mere fact, is an archetypal symbol. The world, in the face of one of the highest moments in spiritual history, was sleeping. The sleep of the apostles represents collective unconsciousness. the inability to perceive what is truly at stake in crucial moments. And this sleep continues to this day. We live surrounded by distractions and trivialities, while cosmic decisions take place around and within us. Gethsemane is also an invitation to awaken, to keep watch, to be present even in the face of fear. Another aspect often overlooked is the solitude of that moment. Jesus, even surrounded by disciples, faced his battle alone. This reflects one of the great truths of the spiritual journey. The most decisive moments of the soul are lived in silence and solitude. Not because we are abandoned, but because these moments require internal listening, external silence, and total alignment with the higher self. Gethsemane reveals the paradoxical beauty of being alone and yet in full union with the source. A silence that echoes more than 1,000 words, a fertile solitude which yields eternal fruits. The garden was not just a stage for pain, but for transformation. That soil witnessed the birth of a new consciousness. The man who entered Gethsemane was not the same one who left there. Before, Jesus had healed, taught, confronted, loved. After that night, he was ready to become the living symbol of human transfiguration. Gethsemane marks the moment when he, as an individual, surrenders his ego, his will, his body, and his future, and accesses his cosmic mission in full lucidity. It is the moment when the human bows to the divine and therefore becomes one with it. This is the point where the real spiritual power of Gethsemane is revealed. There, free will was used in its highest expression. Jesus could have backed down, he could have run away. He was fully aware of the consequences. But he chose the path of surrender, not out of obligation, but out of love. And it is this love, free and conscious, that resonates as a healing force to this day. Gethsemane shows us that the hardest choice is often the most liberating, that surrendering to the greater plan, even without guarantees, is the most revolutionary act a soul can make. Each of us carries within ourselves a part of this garden, a territory where we sense the weight of choice, where we feel the chill of doubt and the warmth of hope. Gethsemane is not only in Jerusalem, it lives within the human conscience. It's the point where the soul meets its destiny, where light and shadow look each other in the eyes, and where the decision shapes not just a path, but an entire future. Gethsemane is not the end, it's the gateway, and crossing it is the first step to remembering who we truly are. In the pitch-black darkness of that night, while the world slept in its comfortable ignorance, Jesus faced a battle that was not merely emotional, nor just spiritual. It was a battle between realms, between visible and invisible forces, between the old and the new cycle of humanity. The darkness of the sky reflected the intensity of the moment. It was as if all of creation was holding its breath, awaiting the unfolding of a choice that would change not only the course of human history, but also the subtle maps of the universe itself. The night of surrender in Gethsemane was a silent night for human ears, but deafening for the celestial realms. Something immense was moving in the cosmic backstage, something that could only be felt in the profound silence of the awakened soul. While the disciples slept, perhaps tired or unable to comprehend the gravity of what was happening, Jesus was fully awake, not just physically, but on all levels of consciousness. He knew that this night would not be just another vigil. It was the threshold between freedom and imprisonment, between continuity and collapse, between human comfort and divine surrender. The silence of his friends became a glaring metaphor for the inner loneliness that precedes every true transformation. No one could make that crossing for him. Like every soul in their own moments of supreme decision, he was alone, but connected to the infinite vastness of a plan that language cannot reach. The prayer at that moment was not a simple spiritual discourse. It was a deep dive into layers of reality that few dare to visit. The sacred text reveals to us that Jesus prayed intensely in a genuine plea, asking that, if possible, the cup be taken away from him. This prayer was not weakness, but a revelation of his human side, of the legitimate conflict between pain and purpose. And here lies one of the greatest mysteries of Gethsemane. Strength is not in suppressing doubt, but in traversing it with faith. To pray in that context was to activate vibrational codes that aligned his earthly consciousness with the frequency of the cosmic mission that awaited him. The chalice, this symbol that crosses centuries and traditions, did not represent just physical suffering. It was the symbolic materialization of a spiritual destiny that involved historical, collective, planetary, and universal layers. Drinking from the chalice was to accept not only the literal cross, but everything it represented: the apparent failure, the unjust judgment, the abandonment, the scorn, the pain of the flesh, the loneliness of the spirit, and above all, the total descent into the shadows to later re-emerge in light. The chalice is the moment when the soul confronts its reason for being and must choose between living in fear or dying for love, and, in this symbolic death, being reborn into a new reality. It is at this point that the narrative presents us with Jesus' sweat transforming into drops of blood. A striking image, laden with symbols, but also with dense spiritual reality. This condition, known in medicine as hematidrosis, can occur in cases of extreme stress, but, in spiritual terms, it reveals the level of vibrational intensity that body was experiencing. The density of the internal suffering was so great that it broke the physical limits. The blood, a symbol of life, mixed with sweat, a symbol of effort, indicates the supreme union between human will and divine mission. It is at this point that the body begins to give way to the spirit, that the flesh begins to bow before eternity. What unfolded in Gethsemane was not an intimate drama, but an event of interdimensional repercussion. Beings from higher spheres were attentively observing the courage of the man who dared to embody, within himself, the dilemmas of all humanity. There were not just angels comforting him, as some traditions mention, but also opposing forces trying to divert him from his path. Gethsemane was the stage for a silent war between awakening and stagnation. Jesus, in his prayer, was crossing veils and energy fields, activating the final authorization for his mission, and consequently, the mission of the entire human race, to be fully accomplished. It is significant to note that, despite expressing his anguish, Jesus ends his prayer with words that still resonate in awakened hearts today: "Thy will be done, not mine." At this moment, the entire heaven moves. The yes said there was not passive. It was an act of such tremendous strength that it opened a portal never to be closed again. The night of surrender became the dawn of liberation. It was not the cross that marked the beginning of salvation. It was this voluntary, lucid, courageous surrender. From that instant, Jesus no longer belonged solely to a story. He became part of a planetary frequency that would influence consciousness for millennia. Meanwhile, the disciples continued to sleep. 3 times Jesus calls them, and 3 times he finds them asleep. The repetition is not accidental. It represents the 3 levels of unconsciousness that humanity still carries: the sleep of the body, the stupor of the mind, and the lethargy of the spirit. Even in the face of the highest manifestation of courage and surrender, human eyes still close. This detail invites us to reflect. How many times does life call us to awaken to something greater and we remain asleep, wrapped up in our small dramas, distracted by the noises of the world? Gethsemane calls us to be vigilant, to awaken to what really matters. The solitude of Jesus on that night, far from being a sign of abandonment, was in fact the final rite of spiritual individualization. He was being separated from the collective to become one with the whole. This apparent separation is common among great initiates, the moment when the soul bids farewell to the group's protection and assumes, alone, the responsibility of its calling. The night of surrender is also the night of maximum individuation. It's when we realize that the path will not be taken en masse, but rather by individuals who dare to say yes when everything around them says, run away. And it is this yes that opens the doors to the impossible. Gethsemane, that night, became a force field where the spirit overcame fear. Jesus, by fully accepting his mission, not only confirmed his path, he altered the earth's vibrational field. His surrender was not just emotional, it reprogrammed hidden codes in the collective consciousness. The planet would never be the same after that dawn. It had transformed into a fertile field for the birth of a new humanity. A humanity capable of choosing light, even under the thickest shadow. A humanity capable of transcending instinct and living under the light of the Spirit. The night of Gethsemane was not a night of defeat. It was the point where the cosmic mission was fully activated. Everything that would come after, imprisonment, torture, crucifixion, was already decided there. The true martyrdom was spiritual. The true sacrifice was internal. The flesh would suffer, yes, but the Spirit had already risen above the circumstances. And this is what makes this night universal. All of us, at some point, will live our own Gethsemane, and before the cup, we will have to choose, to flee or to drink. The one who chooses to drink, with awareness and love, opens within themselves the same portal of liberation that Jesus opened on that sacred night. Long before the carpenter of Nazareth existed, before Galilee, before the prophets, even before there was a planet or humanity, the Christ consciousness already existed. Not as a figure or historical personality, but as a cosmic presence, a field of living intelligence, an eternal frequency pulsating from the heart of the universe. This consciousness, radiant and silent, was not born in Bethlehem. It predates the creation of time, predates the galaxies, predates matter as we know it. Jesus as a man was the vehicle, but Christ as essence is an emanation from the very spiritual center of creation. The incarnation of Jesus was merely the moment when this eternal consciousness decided to don human flesh to fulfill a task of indescribable magnitude. Gethsemane was the place where this cosmic consciousness fully activated in the form of an awakened human being. Until then, Jesus had performed miracles, taught, challenged religious structures, and shown radical compassion. But there, in the garden, he accessed the totality of the mission that awaited him. And this was not limited to one people or one time. He was embodying the Logos, the divine intelligence that structures the worlds. The pain of that moment was not just personal, it was a dense vibration generated by the clash between an unlimited consciousness and the limits of human flesh. Jesus, as the awakened Christ, was crossing the veil of duality and accessing the eternal memory of his cosmic origin, fully realizing the multidimensional extent of his task. Various ancient texts, many of which have been excluded from the official compilations of faith, speak of Christ as a being who existed before everything else. The Gnostic Gospels, for example, describe Christ as an emanation from the pleroma, the space of fullness where higher consciousnesses reside. In these Gospels, Jesus is described as the one who descends from spheres of light to remind men of their true nature. He did not come to establish a religion, but to reignite forgotten memory. In Gethsemane, this mission is renewed with pain, as it is not just about speaking the truth, it's about embodying it, enduring it, and if necessary, being torn apart by it, all in the name of a love that seeks no reward. The Christ consciousness is solar, in the sense that it radiates life, clarity, and renewal wherever it goes. That is why many ancient wise men called Christ the spiritual sun of the earth. In each planetary cycle, this consciousness finds ways to manifest itself in different cultures and languages. In ancient Egypt, it appears as Horus, among the Hindus as Krishna, among the Persians as Mithra. In all these manifestations, there is a pattern: unusual birth, confrontations with darkness, symbolic death, and luminous rebirth. These archetypes are not a coincidence. They are traces of the same Christ field, adapted to the level of consciousness of each era. Jesus, however, brought this frequency with an unprecedented purity, and in Gethsemane, he accepted to live this truth to the very end. When we look at what happened that night with spiritual eyes, we realize that Gethsemane was a point of connection between realms, as if heaven and earth for moments were overlaid. The cosmic mission was not simply to die on a cross, it was something infinitely more comprehensive: to anchor, in the density of this world, the frequency of the eternal Christ. And this is not done with words, but with vibration. By fully accepting his calling, Jesus became a living transmitter of this energy. The pain, the sweat, the blood, the silence, all of this became part of a spiritual antenna that still today emits signals to those who know how to listen with the heart. That's why so many spiritual accounts speak of ascended masters, beings of light, and extra-physical consciousnesses that were present in Gethsemane, invisible to human eyes. What was happening there was monitored, assisted, and revered by intelligences from spheres far beyond common understanding. Christ was preparing to cross the field of death and reconfigure from within the vibratory mesh of humanity. Every atom of his body was being recalibrated to withstand a gigantic transmutation. It was not just a man being tested, it was a plan of light being implanted in the dark field of human ignorance through a living body. Jesus' consciousness at that moment expanded far beyond Palestine. He saw the future ages, the faces that were yet unnamed, the peoples who had not yet been born. He perceived the wars that would come, the falls and rebirths of civilization, the moments when his message would be distorted, and also the moments when it would silently enlighten consciousnesses. He knew that the act of surrender that night would generate waves of transformation that would touch souls for millennia. The mission was not local, it was planetary, it was interdimensional, and above all, it was timeless. That's why the choice was so difficult and so necessary. The acceptance of the chalice was, in fact, the definitive activation of the mission. It was as if Jesus' consciousness sent a signal to the universe. I am ready. Let it be done. And this signal echoed through the layers of time and space, touching consciousnesses in every corner of existence. Many beings awoke at that hour. Many veils were torn in the invisible worlds. Many chains began to break in the human mind. Gethsemane was not a pause before the cross. It was the true beginning of liberation, the vibrational root of a new evolutionary cycle. That's why, even today, when we meditate deeply, we can access this field. Gethsemane is not just a physical place in Jerusalem. It is a living point in the Earth's morphogenetic field, a portal that remains active, a vibrational space accessible through the aligned heart and consciousness surrendered to greater love. When accessing it, we do not see a defeated Jesus. We see a being in his silent glory, his greatness disguised as pain, his royalty hidden under the sweat of choice. We see the Christ consciousness at its peak, not in the power that dominates, but in the love that offers itself. This cosmic mission is not exclusive to one being. On the contrary, it points to the hidden potential within each soul. Christ is not an exclusive title. It is a state of being, and we are all on a journey to awaken this state within us. Jesus' Gethsemane is, in fact, the mirror of the Gethsemane that awaits us. And what he activated that night, by choosing light, is now available to every human being willing to remember their cosmic origin and their greater mission. His surrender opened a path, but it is necessary for each one to traverse it with courage, clarity, and love. The cosmic mission is now collective. And the call remains, are you ready to remember what you came here to do? On that night, shrouded in shadows and silence, while Jesus was undergoing his deepest inner journey, the heavens were not merely watching, they were moving. They were aligning codes, sketching silent comets across the Earth's veil, and articulating astral configurations that would provide energetic support to what was happening on the physical plane. Jesus' cosmic mission was not isolated. It was part of a universal alignment that involved planetary spheres, interdimensional intelligences, and celestial maps hidden from common perception. Gethsemane was not just a spiritual field. It was also an astrological and galactic activation center. What occurred in that earthly geography was, in an exact and synchronized way, mirrored in the constellations. The sky at that moment was a divine manuscript where the planets silently inscribed the rite of surrender that would shape eras. The ancients knew that celestial bodies were not just distant objects, but living mirrors of the Earth's internal dynamics. Astrology, in its purest form, is not superstition, but sacred science, the language of the heavens applied to the soul. And what few realize is that Gethsemane was carefully synchronized with a specific celestial configuration, not by chance, but by design. That night, the stars moved in patterns that activated portals of decision and transmutation. Some scholars of spiritual astronomy reveal that the position of Saturn and Jupiter created a very rare gravitational tension, a kind of vibrational compression that facilitates the breaking of old patterns. This phenomenon, coupled with the lunar passage over strategic points of the zodiac, expanded the field for Jesus' surrender to be not only spiritual, but also energetic, with a measurable impact on the subtle bodies of humanity. The constellation of Pisces, symbol of Christ in the early centuries, reigned in the skies during that period. It governs compassion, sacrifice, unconditional love, and the dissolution of the ego. It's no coincidence that the age of Pisces began with the coming of Jesus and that the fish symbol was the secret code of the early Christians. The sky announced the birth of an era. Gethsemane was the activation point of this transition. The dark night of that prayer, marked by the pain of the chalice, was also the night when the stars whispered, "It is done." In silence, the constellations celebrated the gesture of a man who became a portal of light. Beyond the constellations, the invisible geometry of the Garden of Gethsemane resonated with sacred patterns. There are studies indicating that the terrain formation, the arrangement of the oldest olive trees, and even the slope of the Mount of Olives hold proportions close to those of the golden ratio used in sacred constructions from Egypt to the Renaissance. This ratio, known as Phi 1.618, is present in nature, in the human body, and in musical harmony. When applied to space, it creates resonances with higher planes. Gethsemane, therefore, was a harmonically prepared field, a geophysical antenna connected with stellar flows. The prayer there vibrated differently. The words, when pronounced at that point on the planet, resonated with an amplified energy amplitude. It was like speaking in front of a cosmic mirror. There are also mystical records that point to the relationship between Gethsemane and the ancient star maps of the Kabbalah. The Tree of Life, with its 10 sephirot and the 22 paths that connect them, has parallels with the energetic anatomy of the human body and also with certain regions of the earth. According to this line of thought, Gethsemane would be one of the points that corresponds to the Sephira of Tiferet, the center of balance, beauty, and heart consciousness. It is there that the higher and lower forces meet and integrate. Tiferet is the place where the soul chooses to align with a higher purpose. Jesus' prayer on that night was a profound activation of the planetary Tiferet, a harmonization between the worlds. The Hebrew culture, deeply rooted in numerical language and letters as codes of creation, understood that certain sacred sounds, pronounced with intention and under the correct astral conditions, could open portals of revelation. The name of God, for example, was considered unpronounceable because its vibration was too potent to be spoken in a profane manner. In Gethsemane, when Jesus cries out to the Father in agony, he activates ancient codes buried in the vibrational records of humanity. His words, spoken with pain and love at the same time, are like celestial mantras. They cross the spheres, touching not only the Father's heart, but also awakening the dormant codes in the collective soul. Some modern mystics suggest that during the vigil in the garden, Jesus was consciously accessing these stellar connections. He prayed not just to be heard, but to align his vibration with higher intelligences that were waiting for that moment. It was as if, on that early morning, he positioned himself as a key and bridge between worlds. The prayer was a cosmic password, a kind of alignment with a larger station, a fine-tuning between time and eternity, between the small self and the total self. And in this adjustment, his consciousness expanded beyond linear time. He perceived what was yet to come. Traveling through the inner time of the soul, he touched the pains and healings of future generations. Esoteric traditions teach that portals do not open merely with desire, but with compatible frequency. Gethsemane, prepared for centuries as an activation field, combined three forces: sacred geography, astral alignment, and conscious presence. The presence of Jesus was the final catalyst. His vibration, at that moment, reached the exact degree of resonance that allowed the intertwining between planes. When he says, "Thy will be done," the sky responds, not with words, but with invisible movements, with waves of light crossing the planes. It's as if the entire universe said, "The portal is open. The path is authorized. The mission will be completed." There are symbolic records indicating that at that moment, communication portals between Earth and the star systems linked to the Christic mission, such as Sirius, Orion, and the Pleiades, were activated. According to ancient traditions, these systems house consciousnesses that have been following the evolutionary process of humanity since its beginnings. The surrender of Jesus in Gethsemane activated lights in these points, not as a spectacle, but as a silent sign that the Earth's frequency was changing. The pain of one man resonated as the liberation of a race. It was the beginning of a new spiral of consciousness. When we understand Gethsemane as part of a sacred star map, everything gains a new perspective. Jesus' pain was not merely of a body, it was of an entire field expanding. His surrender was not a blind renunciation, but a lucid choice, made fully aware of the consequences and impacts. He knew that by saying yes, he would open doors that no one else could open, doors that would take millennia to be fully understood, doors that still today invite us to cross. Gethsemane is, therefore, a key that only turns with love, a password that only responds to courage, a map that only reveals itself to those who truly surrender. On that night, under the silent light of the stars, a man crossed a portal and left us, as an inheritance, the way back to what we are. It was not about religion, it was about reconnection with the whole. The sky was in celebration, the earth trembled, and in the center of this vortex, a human heart pulsed in unison with the heart of the universe. In that early morning steeped in spiritual density, under the veil of ancient trees, and before the symbolic chalice of supreme pain, Jesus was facing the choice that would shape the course of the earth and open a new cycle in the vibrational history of humanity. There, in the silence of Gethsemane, he encountered the eternal fork between yes and no, between surrender and retreat, between fulfilling his cosmic mission or preserving his physical integrity. But what few understand is that the power of that moment does not reside solely in the cross that would come, but in the free will exercised with full awareness. The universe is governed by subtle laws, and one of them is non-interference. No soul is obliged to fulfill a spiritual destiny. It can choose, and Jesus chose. He chose to cross the abyss, not by imposition, but by loving, free, and absolutely lucid decision. But what if he had said no? What if on that night, faced with the anticipated pain, the predicted abandonment, and the imminent suffering, he had chosen to retreat? This possibility is not a fiction exercise, but a real aspect of the energy field of Gethsemane. He could have backed down. He had full power to disappear, to withdraw, to silence. His vibration was already so high that it would have allowed him to move between planes without being stopped. And if that had happened, the Earth's field would have followed another route. The consciousnesses that today vibrate under the Christic field would have taken millennia longer to awaken. The matrix of pain and separation, of which we still feel remnants today, would be denser, thicker, more ingrained. The history of the planet, of social systems, of spirituality, and even of science would have had another configuration. His choice, then, was not just out of obedience. It was a gesture of planetary recalibration. By saying yes, Jesus allowed a new vibrational matrix to be installed in the collective human consciousness. The matrix of conscious surrender, of loving surrender, of lucid sacrifice. This matrix is like an invisible field, a spiritual program that silently inhabits the unconscious of humanity. From that moment on, every human being began to carry within them an archetypal memory, the subtle reminder that it is possible to traverse suffering and emerge transformed. His surrender became a code that resonates in each of our choices, in every renunciation for the light, in every gesture of compassion amidst pain. At the moment he accepts the chalice, something happens in the subtlest spheres of reality. Alternate timelines unravel. Cosmic risks are neutralized. Dense presences which had been waiting for that moment for ages to block the advance of light are demobilized, and not by war, but by love. The Earth, until then wrapped in a vibrational mesh that prevented the full connection between matter and spirit, begins to be gently reconfigured. The choice of one man, fully conscious with the frequency of the Christ consciousness active, pierces the veils and touches the deepest layers of the planetary spiritual structure. The Earth begins to be different. Not yet visible, not yet measurable, but already inevitable. This decision reverberated like a silent wave of light, reaching not only the human psyche, but also the Akashic records of the planet. The field of universal memory was altered. A new vibrational trail became available, like an alternative path in a dense forest. A trail made not with stones or maps, but with vibrational examples. Since then, every soul that finds itself before a difficult choice, and who opts for truth, for dignity, for light, even at the cost of its own ego, is, unknowingly, following this trail opened in Gethsemane. It's not about imitating Jesus. It's about vibrating at the frequency he anchored. A frequency of clarity in the face of pain and love in the face of shadow. Gethsemane, then, is the point where humanity was redirected. From there, it became possible to live spirituality not as an escape from the world, but as a brave plunge into it. Jesus did not ascend to avoid suffering. He dove into it with full presence to transmute it from within. This choice changed everything. It transformed the cross into a symbol of light. It transfigured martyrdom into an alchemical tool. It inverted the code of power, from dominance to service. It reconfigured what it means to be strong, from imposition to surrender. Each of these changes resonates to this day, in the invisible structures of human relations, spiritual movements, and even in the new sciences of behavior. This choice also activated what we can call vibrational codes. These are energetic imprints that attach to the auric field of humanity and, when accessed with intention and consciousness, allow us to make leaps in perception. Codes of silent courage, of absolute presence, of unconditional love, of lucid surrender. These codes are not accessible through external rituals, but by the vibration of the heart. They are available in deep meditations, in real prayers, in moral decisions that require renunciation of the ego. Each time someone chooses to act with compassion, even in the face of injustice, one of these codes is activated. Each time someone says yes to the soul and no to fear, another portal opens. Another powerful aspect of this choice is that it authorized the intercession of consciousness from higher planes. Before this, the Earth's vibrational field was too dense to allow this type of contact. But Jesus' surrender, made with such purity, served as a vibrational seal of permission. From there, Christ-like consciousness and instructors from other systems could begin to act directly on the human psyche. Centuries later, the mystics, the visionaries, the peacemakers, the wise, all subtly connected to this field, all without exception, accessing the vortex generated by that solitary and powerful choice. We should not view this act as an isolated drama of the past. It is vibrationally present in every significant moment of any human being's life. Every time you find yourself in front of your own chalice, whether it's an ethical decision, a loss, a hard truth, a life choice, and choose to remain true to your higher conscience, you are invisibly participating in the same field of force. You are reconnecting with the Christ matrix anchored in Gethsemane. You are strengthening the network of light that pulses, silently, from heart to heart throughout the world. Jesus' choice also dissolved a hidden pact between humanity and pain. Until then, suffering was seen as punishment, as a curse, as a debt. From Gethsemane onward, suffering began to hold within itself the possibility of healing, of elevation, of transcendence. It did not cease to be pain, but it began to have another interpretive key. The cross, which was a symbol of oppression and punishment, became a symbol of courage and enlightenment. Abandonment, which was seen as a curse, became a rite of passage. Surrender, which was once weakness, became an act of strength. Each of these transformations was encoded in the planetary vibration by the choice Jesus made that night. In the end, Gethsemane does not teach us to die. It teaches us to live with clarity in the face of pain, to live with courage in the face of fear, to live with surrender in the face of uncertainty, to live with love, even when everything around us invites closure, hardness, separation. The choice that Jesus made was not only his, it opened the possibility for each of us to make the same choice, in our realities, in our sacred moments of decision. The earth was touched that night, and since then, The path is open. The path of conscious choice. The path of light. At the heart of the deepest and most vulnerable human experience lies abandonment, and not circumstantial, superficial, or momentary abandonment, but the one that tears at the very core of the soul, the one that leaves us facing total emptiness, absolute silence, the absence of answers. In Gethsemane, Jesus not only anticipates physical pain, but plunges into the rawest sensation an awakened being can experience, the feeling of being absolutely alone, even in the presence of God. The climax of this feeling does not only occur on the cross when he cries out, "Father, why have you forsaken me?" Zrenia, but begins there, in the garden. It is in the garden that sacred abandonment presents itself as a necessary stage of spiritual transfiguration, not as punishment but as initiation, not as lack but as an overflow of veiled presence. This abandonment is not real in the ontological sense. God never abandons his creation, but it is perceived as real by the human heart that expands to such an extent that it needs to traverse all the veils of separation. The absence felt by Jesus that night was not a divine failure. It was the ultimate test, a test that every being approaching unification undergoes, the test of the solitary crossing, where even the presence of God seems to have been withdrawn. It's the moment where there are no spiritual crutches, no certainties, no visions, only silence, darkness, and the weight of one's own being. And it is precisely there, in this absolute void, that the deepest connection with the all is revealed. The absence is apparent. The union is real. This point of abandonment is described by various spiritual traditions as the dark night of the soul, a stage where the entire inner system is destabilized so that a new configuration of consciousness can emerge. Saint John of the Cross, a 16th century Spanish mystic, described this state as an inevitable stage on the path to enlightenment, a darkness that precedes the dawn, a total emptying of the soul so that God can, finally, inhabit it in its entirety. In Gethsemane, Jesus experiences this dark night in a radical way, not as theory, but as a visceral experience. He feels the absence of everything: friends, security, comfort, and even the divine presence. But this abandonment also has a hidden function. It severs ties with any expectation. It deactivates the desire for control, crumbles the subtle ego that still wants to understand, explain, or anticipate. At the moment of abandonment, the soul sheds everything that is known. It loses its reference points. But it is in this loss that the true reunion becomes possible. The sacred abandonment destroys the false self to reveal the true self. It tears us away from the warm cradle of comfortable spirituality and throws us into the desert where only the essential survives. And it is in this essential that God, in his purest form, touches us. Thus, Gethsemane becomes the mirror of the inner abyss. Jesus there is not just a historical figure. He represents all of us, in our moments of downfall, in our deepest silences, in our nights when the sky seems silent. Each tear that falls amidst abandonment is a prayer that rises silently and shapes the inner space where God will dwell. The prayer made in the midst of divine silence has more power than 1,000 words spoken in moments of clarity. It is pure. It is real. It is born from the absence of certainty. And that's why it crosses the heavens and touches eternity. The sacred abandonment also reveals a truth that many avoid. God allows silence. He allows not knowing. He allows us to traverse stretches of the path without his clear answer. Not because he doesn't love us, but because he loves us too much to keep us dependent on spiritual security. He wants us to mature. He wants us complete. He wants us standing. And for that, he allows us to face the void. He allows us to confront the shadow without his visible light. Because he knows that this light is already within us, waiting to be accessed from within, and not just reflected from outside. Abandonment is, therefore, an invitation to spiritual self-sufficiency, not of arrogance, but of maturity. It is also in abandonment that we discover something extraordinary. The absence of God is, paradoxically, the purest proof of his presence, because one only misses something that they have previously experienced. Only those who have been touched by presence suffer from absence. The cry, "Why have you forsaken me?" only makes sense because there was communion before. The silence of God is the shadow of His previous presence, and by enduring this silence, the soul expands. By remaining faithful even without feeling, consciousness elevates. By continuing to love even without answers, the Spirit illuminates. The loneliness of Jesus on that night also reveals one of the greatest mysteries of spirituality. There are stages of the journey that are non-transferable. No one can live your desert for you. No one can endure your dark night for you. No one can hear the silence of God for you. This is not a punishment. It is part of the soul's refinement. It is in abandonment that the seeker is separated from the curious, the initiate from the dilettante, the true walker from the one who merely desires spiritual comfort. Thus, the dark night of Gethsemane is the gateway to maturity, the baptism of luminous solitude. And there is another aspect to this abandonment. It bears the heart. In the absence of everything, what remains? What is the essence that persists when all supports are gone? In Gethsemane, Jesus shows us this essence, unconditional love. Even without comfort, He chooses to love. Even without guarantees, He remains. Even without feeling the Father's presence, He does not back down. And this is exactly what transforms that abandonment into something sacred. It does not generate bitterness nor resentment. It generates firmness, clarity, and inner strength, because it is at the bottom of the pit that we find the solid rock. And it is this rock that supports all true enlightenment. Gethsemane, then, teaches us not to fear abandonment, not to run from silence, not to retreat in the face of unanswered questions. It teaches us that spiritual maturity is not always about feeling God's presence, but about continuing even when we feel nothing. It's about keeping our hearts open when everything around us invites closure. It's about standing upright, silent, with our eyes turned to the empty sky, knowing that this emptiness is, in fact, the womb of the new. Gethsemane teaches us that we need to die to all images of God in order to finally meet the real God, who dwells beyond all form, beyond all certainty, beyond all image. And it is in this abandonment that the true union begins, because only those who have crossed the desert without a map, without company, without answers, can fully unite with the source. And even so, they have arrived. Gethsemane reminds us that the greatest strength is born from vulnerability, that the greatest light emerges from the darkest point, that the true encounter happens when there is no longer anything to expect. Jesus' choice in the face of sacred abandonment is the choice of all great masters, to remain, just to remain, steady, whole, loving. And this is what changes everything. It's not the miracles, it's not the speeches. It's the silent perseverance in the face of absence. It's the yes murmured through tears. It's the heart that doesn't give up even when everything seems lost. In that dense dawn, when the choice was sealed, when the Father's silence became a hidden guide and Jesus' spiritual loneliness reached its peak, not only was the fate of a man being shaped, a new vibrational structure for all humanity was being implemented. The night of Gethsemane was not confined to its historical time. It was, in fact, the invisible foundation of a new architecture of human consciousness, a plan for energetic reform that would progressively affect the mind, the emotional body, and the collective spiritual field of the human race. There, under the silent olive trees, when love overcame pain and surrender dissolved fear, Christ anchored a completely new model of being, of feeling, of perceiving, and of existing. This model is available even today, pulsating in the subtlest frequencies of the earth, waiting to be integrated by those who dare to cross the same portal. Up until then, human consciousness was shaped by survival instincts, fear, separation, and domination. Even in the most advanced spiritual traditions, the pursuit of the divine was still intertwined with the desire for power, individual ascendancy, and protection against suffering. But Jesus' decision in Gethsemane launched something radically new, the consciousness of unconditional love operating from within vulnerability. He did not win through power, he won through surrender. He did not impose himself on the world, he transcended it. This silent and absolute gesture implanted in the psychic field of humanity the possibility to think, feel, and act from a different axis. the axis of Christ consciousness, centered not on the ego, but on the essential being that includes all, forgives all, understands all, and transforms all without violence. This new architecture of consciousness was not imposed, it was sown. Like a vibrational code released into the subtle plane of earth, waiting for hearts tuned into it to capture and develop it, not through doctrines, but through presence. This vibrational matrix began to gradually alter the internal possibilities of perception. Since then, it has become possible to look at pain without identifying with it. It has become feasible to act with compassion without expecting reward. It has become accessible to live under the Spirit's light, even within the chaos of the material world. And all of this because one man, in full lucidity, chose not to withdraw, not to protect himself, not to defend himself, but to remain present, whole, willing to traverse all layers of human suffering without losing his connection with the source. This new awareness does not abruptly replace the previous one. It overlays like a new layer, like a higher frequency available to those who wish to access it. The old structures still exist: fear, separation, violence, desire for control. But now in parallel, there is a vibrational support network built from the Christic presence. This network is like a web of light that envelops the Earth's psychosphere, offering at every moment an energetic alternative to the repetition of old patterns. When someone chooses to forgive instead of avenge, when someone chooses to embrace instead of condemn, when someone chooses to remain peaceful even in the face of injustice, that person is activating, in their own field, this new architecture. Gethsemane, therefore, is more than a historical event. It is an update in the matrix of consciousness. Before it, spiritual evolution was based on effort, merits, and punishments. After it, spirituality becomes a vibrational possibility accessible through love. Jesus' choice inaugurated the era of the awakened heart. Even though humanity doesn't fully live in this new level yet, it is already available. And every human being in every generation has the chance to tune in with it, like tuning into an invisible but real radio station. And when this tuning happens, the world around may remain the same, but the internal experience changes radically. The new architecture also affected the way souls incarnate. After Gethsemane, a new type of soul began to arrive on the planet. Souls with a memory of surrender, with a natural affinity for compassion, predisposed to light. Many of these souls were rejected, misunderstood, even silenced. But gradually, they were sowing the new world with their silent presence. They are the ones who do not conform to domination systems. They are the ones who do not corrupt in the face of power. They are the ones who love without reason. They are the ones who feel that there is something greater and live in search of it, even without knowing exactly what it is. These souls, connected to the Christic field of Gethsemane, help to keep the architecture of the new consciousness alive. This new field also brought profound implications for the human body. The DNA, receptive to vibrational changes, began to undergo subtle mutations. Latent codes of empathy, telepathy, multidimensional perception, and energy healing were slowly being activated. Brain structures linked to intuition, creativity, and compassion began to be more utilized. And even though humanity is still far from fully living this new model, it is already underway. Bodies are being prepared, emotions are being purified. Social structures, although still resistant, are being questioned and deconstructed. All of these are effects of the new vibrational matrix anchored that night. The architecture of the new consciousness also redefines the relationship with suffering. Before, it was seen as punishment, cruel fate, or a sign of weakness. Now, it can be recognized as part of the process of refinement and reconnection. It's not glorification of pain, but understanding its role in the expansion of the soul. The Gethsemane shows us that suffering does not need to close us off. It can open us up. It does not need to harden us. It can soften us. It does not need to push us away from the light. It can bring us closer to it, if lived with presence, surrender, and love. This understanding changes everything. It liberates. It elevates. It heals. Another consequence of this new model of consciousness is the activation of the internal Christic field. This field is a vibrational spark that every human being carries within. It is the possibility of becoming a channel for the same energy that Jesus anchored. It is not a gift reserved for saints or enlightened ones. It is a potential reality in every being. When one meditates deeply, when one silences with reverence, when one loves with truth, this field lights up. And for moments or entire cycles, the person begins to act not by the separated self, but by the self united with the whole. This state is what traditions call unification, enlightenment, awakening. And all of this was made accessible that dawn in the garden. Finally, the new architecture of consciousness hands us a map. A map not found in books, but etched in the vibrational field of the earth and in the human heart. It's a map that can be read between the lines of silence, in gestures of compassion, in choices that favor life, in the courage to remain whole in the face of pain. It's an invisible map, yet accurate. It guides us back to the essentials. It reconnects us to the origin. It shows us that we don't need to become something to be divine. We just need to remember who we are. And this remembrance starts when we access the field of Gethsemane within us. Gethsemane is now. It pulsates in every dilemma, in every crossing, in every choice between fear and love. And the new architecture of consciousness provides us with the foundation to choose differently, to choose wisely, with love, with surrender. The earth is being regenerated by these silent choices, and each one of us is an active part of this new world that is being born, not tomorrow, not later, but now. There is a point in time when major events become more than just accounts, more than legends or scriptures. They become living mirrors. Gethsemane, with its intense spiritual burden, its sacred silence, and its atmosphere of cosmic decision, no longer belongs only to the story of one man, but has become a universal, active, intimate call that whispers to every awakened soul. This call does not shout, does not demand, does not force. It invites, it gently touches the core of being, in unexpected moments, in solitude, in pain, in doubt, in the moment before surrender or courage. It arises at the exact point where the soul finds itself facing something greater than itself. And then, the choice presents itself, to retreat or to cross. Gethsemane, once geographical, has become internal. Every human being carries, somewhere deep within their consciousness, the Garden of Decision, the space where the mission is revealed and fear manifests, the point where the spirit and the ego meet face to face. This call is not exclusive to initiates or seekers, it is universal. It reaches the family man who, exhausted, must decide between maintaining his integrity or becoming corrupt. It reaches the wounded woman who must choose between repeating the cycle of pain or breaking away with dignity. It touches the young person who feels an inexplicable inner impulse, a sensation that there is something more, even when everything around them points to the contrary. Gethsemane does not choose people. It simply activates when the soul is ready, and when it activates, there is no return to the old world. The person may resist, may deny, may postpone, but the field has been touched. And from there, a new journey begins, the journey of inner truth. This silent call often arrives disguised as a crisis. It manifests as a breakdown, an end, a loss that seems unfair, a situation demanding a radical decision. And in this collapse, there is a hidden invitation. Stop, listen, enter the garden. The soul, at these moments, is brought to its 0 point. All external supports dissolve, references disappear, certainties crumble. Only the bare heart remains in front of something invisible. And this is where Gethsemane presents itself, not with answers, but with presence. Not with solutions, but with a vibration that pushes inward to the center, to the place where the true yes needs to be said. A yes without guarantees. A yes that can hurt, but that can also liberate. When the inner Gethsemane activates, everything in a person's life begins to reorganize. Relationships change. Priorities adjust. Masks start to fall. The soul, unknowingly, enters a process of purification. There are sleepless nights. There are inexplicable tears. There is a longing for something not yet known. All of this is part of the calling. It's as if the inner being knows that the time is coming to cross the great crossroads, to continue serving the ego or to surrender to the soul. And at this point, there's no deceiving oneself. The vibration of Gethsemane exposes everything. The hidden desires, the camouflaged fears, the attachments masked as spirituality. Everything comes to the surface, not to judge, but to be seen, accepted, integrated, and finally, released. This process can be terrifying. It may seem like a collapse, but it is, in truth, a birth. Gethsemane is the spiritual womb where the new identity begins to emerge. And like every birth, it requires pain, it requires rupture, it requires surrender. But the pain is not the end, it is the passage. It is the channel through which light penetrates the hardest structures. It is in the internal Gethsemane that one realizes that there is no longer a way to sustain the old stories. There is no longer a way to justify the same choices. There is no longer a way to postpone the calling. And when this realization sets in, there is no other alternative but to silence and listen. Because the garden only reveals itself to those who stop, to those who quiet, to those who bow down. Upon entering their own Gethsemane, the human being reconnects with the inner Christ, not as a distant master, but as a vibrant, pulsating present vibration. Gethsemane is the point where the Christ-like spark ignites with greater intensity. It is there that the inner presence takes the lead and the ego begins to lose its strength. Not in a violent way, but through the light of consciousness. And as this presence grows, the yes begins to form. A yes that does not depend on certainties, that does not demand proof, that does not calculate gains. It is a pure yes. A yes born from love for the truth. And when this yes is pronounced, even with tears, even amidst pain, the entire universe listens. This internal yes changes everything. It doesn't immediately alter external circumstances, but it changes the vibration with which a person experiences each of them. They start to see things differently. They start to notice subtle signs. They start to hear the quiet voice that was always there, but only now becomes clear. And more than that, they start to trust. Not because everything has become easier, but because something within them has aligned with something greater. And this alignment brings peace, not from the absence of conflict, but from the presence of purpose. The soul, at last, knows where it's going. And this knowledge doesn't need words. It vibrates, it guides, it sustains. Gethsemane, when experienced internally, also activates forgotten gifts. The gift of deep listening, the gift of intuition, the gift of true compassion, the gift of perceiving others beyond appearances, the gift of silent prayer that transforms realities. These gifts are not magical, they are natural. They were just dormant under layers of fear and conditioning. The silent call of the garden begins to dissolve these layers, and the being awakens, not as someone special, but as someone real, someone who, finally, remembers who they are, someone who accepts to channel the same light that Jesus activated on that sacred dawn. And this call continues. It does not cease. It presents itself at every new life cycle. Each transition is a new Gethsemane. Each crucial decision is a new garden. Each act of conscious surrender is a new portal opening. It is not necessary to suffer as Jesus suffered, but it is necessary to say the same yes with the same wholeness. It is not necessary to undergo the same abandonment, but it is necessary to cross the same night. It is not necessary to repeat the cross, but it is necessary to assume the light that demands responsibility, courage, clarity, and above all, love. A love that cannot be explained, that is simply lived. The Gethsemane within us is the point of return to the sacred. It doesn't ask for dogmas nor structures. It asks for presence. It asks for authenticity. It asks for silence. It asks for surrender. And when this request is met, there's no turning back. The soul crosses the threshold and begins to live in a different way. Even in the world, it is no longer of the world. It walks lightly, even under the weight of circumstances. It serves in silence. It heals with a glance. It sustains with presence. It becomes a garden for others who are still seeking their entrance into the inner Gethsemane. This call is now at this very moment being issued. It's vibrating in sensitive hearts. It's whispering in the early mornings of doubt. It's echoing in prayers made with tears. It's present in gestures of silent courage. It doesn't depend on religion nor belief. It only depends on openness, on being willing to stop, listen, and cross over, on humility to recognize that the ego no longer has the answers, on trust to say yes, even without knowing what will come next, because this yes opens doors that no force in the universe can close. And by saying yes, the soul not only crosses its Gethsemane, it also becomes a path. It also becomes a garden. It also becomes a presence. And this presence, vibrating silently, starts to be called alive by others. Thus, Gethsemane perpetuates itself, not as past, but as a living pulse, as an eternal gateway, as a secret altar in the heart of every awakened being. What happens after Gethsemane is crossed? What follows when the inner yes is finally pronounced, when the cup is accepted and the soul, even wounded, decides to continue? The world does not change immediately. The pains are still there. The shadows still cast. The body still trembles. Fear still whispers. And the mind, often, tries to return to the comfort zone. But there is something that can no longer be undone. The portal has been opened. It is not in heaven, nor in the beyond. It now pulses, in full earth, in the awakened heart of those who dared to cross the garden, face abandonment, and affirm their own light. This portal is real. It is not physical, but its consequences manifest in the material plane. It is vibrational, but it acts like a power plant that transforms everything it touches. And when it is activated in someone, that someone starts to vibrate on another axis, and the world around responds. But what does it mean to live with this portal open? It means, above all, to live in a state of radical presence, to be here, whole, even when pain visits, to be available, even when there are no guarantees. It means not to live anymore by impulse or repetition, but by consciousness. Presence becomes the new temple, the now, the new altar. The awakened soul becomes its own priestess, and her prayer is silent, constant, made of actions, gestures, small and daily choices. Each decision now carries the weight of purpose. Each word, each glance, each silence becomes part of the mission. Because Gethsemane has not ended, it has just changed its form. Now it lives in the everyday. It lives in every situation where the soul is challenged to love, even when wounded. Living with the portal open also means accepting that there's no longer a way to hide. Everything that is false starts to unravel. Masks fall, artificial bonds break, illusory paths reveal themselves to be barren. The soul, now aware of its origin and direction, no longer tolerates living halfway. And this often means going through periods of apparent loneliness, breakups, and profound reconfigurations. But these phases are not signs of error. They are symptoms of transition. When the portal opens, reality needs to align with the new frequency, and this may require entire structures to crumble so that something truer can emerge. Chaos, then, reveals itself as realignment, collapse as healing, crisis as birth. This new state of being, activated by Gethsemane, also releases a new perception of time. The past ceases to imprison because it has been transmuted by the light of surrender. The future ceases to be an obsession because the soul understands that the only real place is the now. Linear time begins to bend in the face of presence, and the person begins to live in a kind of sacred time, where everything is connected, where each event carries meaning, where encounters are no longer coincidences, but recognitions. Life becomes a field of synchronicities, of subtle messages, of spontaneous revelations, because consciousness is tuned with the intelligence of the whole, and this intelligence responds, sustains, guides. But opening the portal does not mean exempting oneself from the pain of the world. On the contrary, the awakened soul becomes even more sensitive. It feels the collective suffering more intensely. It perceives the subtle currents of pain, of exclusion, of injustice, and therefore it is called to serve, not out of obligation, but out of compassion. Service becomes natural. Caring for others, instinctive. The desire to build a more just, more integral, more truthful world becomes part of the breath. Spirituality ceases to be an escape and becomes loving action. Living with the portal open is also becoming a channel of healing, of listening, of love, of presence, a silent and firm channel that supports, even when no one sees. This state also transforms the relationship with the sacred. God ceases to be a concept or doctrine. He becomes an intimate, undeniable living presence. Prayer changes. It becomes listening. It becomes inhabited silence. It becomes constant surrender. The temple now is the body, the altar, the heart. The ritual is the daily gesture. There is no longer a separation between spiritual and human. Everything is spiritual. The act of washing dishes, when done with presence, is prayer. The gaze that welcomes without judging is a blessing. Conscious breathing is an offering. The entire life becomes liturgy. And Gethsemane pulses in every action done with love. But then, what to do with this open portal? Live. Live deeply. Live attentively. Live courageously. Live truthfully. Live without running from pain, but also without feeding off it. Live without seeking approval, but without falling into indifference. Live like someone who knows they are here for a reason. And this reason doesn't need to be grand in the world's eyes. It just needs to be true. It could be taking care of someone. It could be writing a word. It could be teaching, welcoming, healing, cleaning, feeding, listening. The form doesn't matter. The vibration does. Living with the portal open is to be light in the task life has given you. It's to illuminate from who you are, without imitating, without forcing, just being. With the portal open, death also changes its meaning. It ceases to be an end and reveals itself as a return. Return to the origin. Return to the vibrational home. The soul no longer fears the end, because it knows there is no end. There is only transition. There is only a change in frequency. This knowledge liberates. It frees from anxiety. It frees from haste. It frees from the need to accumulate, to prove, to win. The awakened soul knows that it already is, and this state of being, sustained with humility, radiates. It transforms environments. It heals simply by existing. Gethsemane, then, is no longer a memory. It is a permanent state of connection. And the world. The world also feels. Gradually, like a body receiving a new type of cell, it begins to respond. It starts to make room for new structures. It begins to accept other ways of living, of relating, of building. The economy, politics, science, education, everything begins to be permeated by this new frequency. There is still resistance. There are still shadows. But the light is already there, and it will not be contained. Gethsemane has opened a path that can no longer be closed. It lives in every soul that awakens. It vibrates in every gesture born of love. It blossoms in every corner where presence overcomes haste. And now it's time to take charge, to embrace the light, to embrace the mission, to take on the responsibility of living with the portal open, not as a burden, but as an honor, not as an obligation, but as a loving response. The world needs awakened presences. It needs eyes that see beyond. It needs hearts that do not harden. It needs voices that speak the truth. It needs gestures that heal, even without uttering a single word. Gethsemane was not the end. It was the beginning of a new humanity, and this humanity will not be born at the hands of the powerful, but through the silence of the awakened. You crossed the garden. You said yes. The portal opened. And now you live, with courage, with compassion, with truth, with wholeness, because the world needs you. Not an ideal, perfect, or enlightened person, but you, whole, present, real, ready to live with an open heart, ready to be Gethsemane in the midst of the world. Mind unfettered, now that you have crossed the Gethsemane with an open heart, I want to invite you to something very special. Take a deep breath and tell me in the comments, when in your life did you feel that you were also standing before your own inner garden? When did you have to choose between stepping back or moving forward, even without any guarantees? Share your experience. Your story could be the push that another soul needs to cross their own threshold. If you've made it this far, it's because you've already realized the master key is in your hands. The choice has been made, the path is clear, and now, with this new awakened consciousness, you hold the power to transform your reality, not by force, but by the vibration of your presence, your surrender, and your truth. And to continue this journey of deep reconnection with the mysteries of existence, click now on the video next to this. The Secret Code of the Tree of Life. Unlock the hidden power of Kabbalah. In it, we will reveal the secret codes that underpin all of creation, a sacred architecture that directly connects with everything we experience here in Gethsemane. Are you ready to discover how to decipher the Tree of Life and activate the next level of your mission? Mind unfettered, the path goes on, and it's more alive than ever.